Back to new business. Motion from the interim county manager, recognition of construction and final method for construction of Grantham Middle School and Spring Creek Middle School. Mr. Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, y'all all have a fairly detailed memo that I sent to you last Thursday, but I do want to go through that with you because this is a very important topic. As I said in the first paragraph to this memorandum, the purpose of this is to discuss the various options you have for financing and constructing the two new middle schools, Spring Creek and Grantham. And I want to stress again that you've made a commitment already to building and financing them. So this is not about whether you're going to build them. The decision has been made to build them. The only question now is what's the best method to build and finance them. Essentially, there are 5 methods of building and financing the Spring Creek and Grantham Middle Schools authorized by the general statutes of North Carolina that would have been available to you. They are an operating lease, a capital lease, the design bid build method with financing provided by a North Carolina General Statute 16820 security interest debt instrument, such as certificates of participation, which would be issued by the county, or the design build method, again with financing provided by the county. And then the last one is a public-private partnership construction contracts. And what I'd like to do now is go through all 5 of those and then give you my recommendation. Under an operating lease, as y'all remember, the Board of Education had been negotiating with a developer architect for an operating lease. This method is authorized by North Carolina General Statutes 115C 530, and I have enclosed that statute within the memo for you. The Board of Commissioners approved on February 24th the concept of using an operating lease as proposed by the Board of Education, but subject to working out the details and getting the approval of the North Carolina Local Government Commission. That proposal was skeptically received by the Local Government Commission, which is a division of the North Carolina State Treasurer's Office that is charged with overseeing local government finances. They pretty strongly suggested that we should consider either a capital lease or using a North Carolina GS 168-20 financing, with the BOE or the Board of Commissioners bidding out the construction. The Local Government Commission must approve all operating leases and capital leases for school construction, and they must also approve any issuance of COPS or general obligation bonds by the county. The Local Government Commission took this position in a preliminary conference in Raleigh on March 18, 2014, which was attended by the developer architect and his attorney and investment banker, the Board of Education superintendent, a board member, and its attorney, and 2 boards of commissioners, the county manager, the county attorney, our bond counsel, the finance director, and our financial advisor, Davenport. The Local Government Commission staff made it clear that they would find it difficult to call this an operating lease, as it was really a capital lease. The overriding reason the developer wanted it classified as an operating lease was to get a larger federal tax credit for the installation of a solar system. However, under federal tax law, he could not get the tax credits if the operating lease agreement had a specific price for conveying the property to the Board of Education after at least 5 years. That was not acceptable to the county, as we have always insisted on a known dollar figure for buying out or assuming the lease after 5 years. Given all of these problems, the parties have abandoned the use of the operating lease method. So at that point, we started looking at a capital lease. This method is authorized by North Carolina General Statutes 115C 531 and 532, both of which I want to point out have been repealed effective July 1, 2015, and I have enclosed those as an attachment to this report as well. According to the LGC, they were repealed because they have not been used since enacted in 2006. So I want to stress that point. No county in North Carolina has used a capital lease method. Originally set to sunset in 2013, that was extended to July 1, 2015. The Local Government Commission also indicated that Mecklenburg, Cumberland, Iredell, Wake, and Guilford counties had all looked into the possibility of using a capital lease, but they never did. They apparently concluded that a 168-20 financing or a general obligation bond was much better. A capital lease is the developer's next preferred option. In a capital lease for a build-to-suit school, the Board of Education would convey the property to the Board of Commissioners, who would then lease the property to the developer. This is necessary to be able to get a reimbursement of the state sales tax on the construction materials. The county would have to approve of the capital lease agreement. The Board of Education can enter into pre-development agreements such as architectural and engineering contracts. And in fact, the BOE signed a contract for $2 million with SFL+A Architects out of Raleigh on March the 3rd, 2014 for the preliminary design, then following Board of Education approval, full design, plans, specifications, and contract documents. And attachment 3 to this report is a copy of that contract. The work was begun, however, in December 2013, according to invoices the county has received for payment. So the contract's dated March 3rd, but the work began in December of the prior year. Under the capital lease statute, the county BOC is to approve any pre-development agreements. To my knowledge, this was not done, but in fairness to the school board, that's because they had been pursuing the operating lease option at that time. Once the design is completed under a capital lease, the BOE would then negotiate the capital lease with the developer. That agreement must be approved by both the County Board of Commissioners and the North Carolina Local Government Commission. This is the stage in the process we are at now. The capital lease agreement would spell out exactly what facilities are included in the lease, the terms of the lease, the amount of the annual lease payments, provisions for buying out or assuming the lease, the operations and maintenance responsibilities of the lessor and lessee, the terms of how the construction costs will be calculated and financed, and the legal remedies for the BOE and BOC if the developer does not meet his financial obligations for his debt financing. We had numerous points of disagreement with the developer's proposal made on March 21, 3 days after we got back from the LGC, in a 3-hour meeting. The first is that it was hard to get to a bottom line price for the actual construction from the information presented by the developer. We finally got that resolved. By statute, the construction manager or developer must receive sealed bids from prime contractors. If those bids come in lower than the estimated cost, all the savings should go to reducing the cost of the contract. The developer's proposal had the savings going to himself. Bear in mind that it is the developer who prepared and offered the estimated cost figure in the first place. If that number was padded, he would have made a substantial profit under this proposal. We also had a serious disagreement with his contingency figure. He had included a $2,700,000 contingency to cover any change orders that might arise. He had any savings from not using the full $2,700,000 going to him, not the Board of Education. Again, as with the initial contract price, the contingency amount had been provided by the developer. So if that number were padded, he would have made a substantial profit under his proposal. He objected to this savings going to the Board of Education instead of him, saying he was assuming the risk. He also wanted the Board of Education to pay for his construction financing cost, despite the fact that the Board of Education will not occupy the schools until construction is completed. By comparison, if we issue 20-year COPs for the construction, the County and Board of Education would begin paying the debt service 6 months after the issuance, but we would only pay for 20 years. Under his proposal, we would pay for 20 years of debt service, plus his construction loan interest being built into the rates. Using this method, he would qualify for about $1,200,000 in federal tax credits for the installation of the solar electricity system. That savings should be deducted from the cost of the construction contracts in order for the BOE to benefit from it. His initial proposal was to deduct these credits from the cost of construction. However, his second proposal on March 28 only agreed to $600,000 of the tax credits, reducing the construction cost. And if you look at the chart, if you'll go ahead and put that up. I'm going to be referencing this chart now. If you add up all the fees that the developer had in his initial proposals, they would be: he had $4,193,051 in the cost breakdown for architectural and engineering fees. If the project has been designed and construction documents prepared for $2 million, which is what his contract was for, the only engineering fees would be for site design such as parking lots, driveways, and stormwater detention ponds. Those should have been covered by the $2 million, as his civil engineer helps him design these items. I am not clear why he needs additional fees over the $2 million. $4,193,051 for two projects, estimated to cost $38,700,000, is an architectural design fee of 10.8%. That is high for a standard architectural design contract. It should be in the 8% range or lower. Bear in mind that this figure does not include any construction administration, which would cover his occasional inspections, design and approval of change orders, and certification of pay requests. In addition, the percentage will be even higher if the construction bids come in much lower than his estimated cost figures. In addition to those fees, he had $360,000 for construction commissioning. This is for additional testing of all the systems before the buildings are used. Then he had $400,000 for building optimization, which covers 4 more years of additional testing. I do not recommend that you do either one. Contractors are required in the contract to provide all the operation and maintenance manuals for all systems and a source of training for our personnel. That provision should be in any agreement with the developer. Finally, he had a $450,000 development fee. This is supposedly his cost for putting this option together, which entails primarily the financial and legal aspects necessitated by this complex transaction. At the March 28th meeting, he added a $2 million development fee and changed the $450,000 fee to developer overhead / general conditions. So if you add all of those up, you have the $4,193,051, the $360,000 for construction commissioning, $400,000 for building optimization, $450,000 for developer overhead general conditions, and $2 million for development fees. That's a total of $7,403,051, which would be the fees to the developer. Gentlemen, if you divide that by the cost of these two projects, which is $38,700,000, this developer would get fees of 19.1% to design these schools and provide you with a lease in order to do this. 19.1%. The original proposal could have resulted in no use of the contingency. If so, the developer would have received an additional amount of $2,700,000. If that had happened, he would have received total compensation of $10,103,051. That would have increased his total compensation to 26.1% of the estimated construction cost. 26% to design these schools and provide you with a lease arrangement on them. 26%. Bear in mind that the percentage could actually end up even higher If the construction bids come in below the $38,700,000, then the divisor will be smaller. That will increase the percentage of the total construction cost going to developer compensation. And I remind you, it doesn't even include any fees for contract administration. In my opinion, this original developer proposal was absolutely ludicrous. I've never seen anything like this in 36 years of city and county management. No one should pay this level of fees for the design and construction of a building and give the architect savings from a contingency allowance. At the March 28th meeting, the developer proposed that he split the $1,200,000 tax credit and split the contingency. He also reduced the contingency to roughly $652,000 as we agreed to remove bad soils from the contingency. We discussed the various points, and the best deal he was willing to agree to was as follows. And in the interest of time, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if you want me to read through every bullet point on here, but this was a very detailed agreement. It has 31 points to it. If y'all would like, I'll be happy to read through them.
What's the pleasure of the board?
You want to go through it? All right. Number one, the architect's design fee would be $3.8 million under the capital lease option. There are no other design services needed at this point to bid the project out. Number two, an independent construction inspector will be selected jointly to oversee the construction, as the architect is also the developer. This is one of the primary problems with this capital lease agreement, is that the developer is also the builder. And so somebody's got to be watching the builder. The architect would receive a $700,000 development fee. The architect would keep all of the estimated $1.2 million in renewable energy tax credits. The base price of $34,386,398 is an estimate, not a guaranteed not to exceed base price. The alternates group one price of $2,247,130 is an estimate, not a guaranteed not to exceed figure. The alternates group two price of $2,163,350 is an estimate, not a guaranteed not to exceed figure. Those three figures will be lowered by the difference in each of them and the total of the prime contractor's successful bids for the construction. So in other words, the savings, once we bid the projects out to the prime contractors, will go to the Board of Education, not to the developer. Each of the prime contractor contracts to be included in this calculation will be listed in the capital lease document. The specific items included in the base price, the alternates group 1, the alternates group 2, and for alternates group 3, which has not been budgeted for at all, must be specifically listed as part of the capital lease document so that we are 100% clear about how to adjust the construction contract's pricing once the construction manager at risk receives the bids on all the contracts. In addition, it needs to be agreed that the base price includes the driveways, parking lots, and outside lighting, and the stormwater detention retention system. The construction manager at risk contract, including the price, must be agreed to by the Board of Education before the capital lease is executed. All requests for change orders must be approved by the Board of Education and the developer. No contingency amount has been included in this capital lease. Any payments for contingencies shall be at the Board of Education and Board of Commissioners' expense, just as it would be under a design bid build method. The Board of Education and Board of Commissioners reserve the right to change to an alternative site if the cost of bad soils is deemed prohibitive in their sole discretion. The $360,000 for construction commissioning will be bid out to a separate engineering firm with the price adjusted downward to the actual contract amount. Our facilities manager does not believe that this service is needed, and I would add, I don't either. The building optimization of $400,000 has been deleted. The developer has agreed to a written guarantee that the solar system will in fact produce enough electricity to furnish all the electricity needs of the entire facilities. He will pay for a period of 20 years any net electricity bill for either school. This guarantee will be triggered if in the 4 years after the first complete year of school occupancy, the system does not produce the entire kilowatt-hour usage at either school. This is the sole purpose of going to this high-performance school. And so if he cannot guarantee that it's going to generate this electricity, then we haven't gotten our money's worth. And so that's the reason that's in there. There is no guarantee of any surplus power generation that can be sold to Duke Energy, nor is there any contract that can be assumed by the Board of Education for those sales. And I want to stress this. It is conceivable that we would generate the electricity and not be able to sell it at a reasonable price. As y'all know, there are solar arrays going up all over Wayne County and virtually all other 99 counties. Duke Power has a state mandate to use 12.5% renewable energy in its base. At some point, as rapidly as all these solar panels are being deployed throughout the state, that 12.5% is going to be reached. Solar is not cheaper than their other fuel choices. So if that 12.5 is reached, and then you come along 5 years later and want to enter into an agreement with them, they may or may not want to take that power. And I just want to stress that. The estimated value in current dollars of the annual sales of excess electricity is $30,000. Under the capital lease option, those sales go to the developer until the county exercises its right to buy the two schools, and that would be at least 5 years. Because of the tax credit situation, it has to be at least 5 years. In calculating the savings from the high-performance system, the Board of Education has determined that the electricity cost for comparable middle school facilities currently run $150,000 to $160,000 annually per school. So if all the electricity needs are met by this system, that would be an annual savings of $300,000 to $320,000. We have rejected the developer's assertion that Progress or Duke Energy rates will increase by 5% a year. In calculating the savings, we will assume an increase equal to Duke Energy's average rate increases over the last 15 years. In addition, the savings will be adjusted to the present value as our bond counsel noted, and Davenport will do this analysis. The developer and the Board of Education will enter into a capital lease agreement with all of these terms and conditions, which must be approved by the Board of Commissioners and the North Carolina Local Government Commission. The developer, the Board of Education, and the Board of Commissioners agree to handle a land lease in the manner necessary to qualify this capital lease for reimbursement of state sales tax to the credit of the Board of Commissioners to reduce the project cost. This is a critical component of the deal, and if it is determined later by the North Carolina Department of Revenue that the sales tax cannot legally be reimbursed, the Board of Commissioners and Board of Education would lose this estimated $1.2 million in construction savings if you use the capital lease. And I want to pause right here and tell you that our council and our bond counsel have some reservations about that. Rather than interrupt this, I'm going to ask that they give you their comments after we finish this presentation. The lease payment shall be adjusted down from the original estimate of $2.9 million annually, since the terms of the contract will lower our cost. The Board of Education and Board of Commissioners would agree to a lease payment schedule that covers 20 years of financing at a guaranteed rate only for the principal amount needed to be financed after the bids are secured. The Board of Education's verbal agreement to put in an additional $5 million under the discarded operating lease proposal would remain in effect. The Board of Education has already committed to $2 million of this amount for the architectural contract. The Board of Commissioners must approve the terms of the financing, including the principal amount, duration, call features, fixed rates of interest per year, assumption cost and terms, and refinancing cost and terms. Our annual lease payments should begin 6 months after the notice to proceed has been issued to the prime construction contractor. That would be comparable to the date we would begin payments if we borrowed the money using a 16820 debt issuance under the design bid build method. The developer must enter into an agreement for financing subject to approval by the BOC. The final agreement must allow the county to assume the loan after the Board of Education has occupied the 2 schools for 5 years without any penalty or modification of the terms, and to repay the loan in full without penalty after making 10 years of lease payments. Since the actual amount to be financed cannot be determined until the construction bids are received, the financial agreement must include a provision that locks in the rates for the period of time necessary to obtain the bids and award the contracts. It also must allow for an increase or decrease in the amount depending on the bids and whether we accept any alternate bids. The rates must be a fixed rate and not unnecessarily defer principal payments. The Local Government Commission likes level principal payments, not level debt payments, debt service payments, which are principal and interest. The Board of Commissioners will select whether to use level principal payments or level debt service payments. Level principal payments will cost more interest in the early years, but will decrease the amount of interest paid over the 20-year period. The financing agreement must stipulate that no terms or conditions can be altered or waived, and no refinancing of this agreement can be done without the express written approval of the Board of Commissioners. The reason for that should be obvious. It's our, if you go into this, the last 15 years, you're assuming this financial instrument. So we wanted it crystal clear that you had to approve it. The capital lease must state that the Board of Education can purchase the 2 schools and cancel the land leases any time after they have occupied them for 5 years. In addition, the capital lease must state that the cost to purchase will be the assumption of the loan and therefore the outstanding principal balance of the developer's financing agreement for this project, provided he is current in his payments. The Board of Education and the Board of Commissioners shall enter into an agreement detailing that the Board of Education commits to using $2.2 million of lottery and/or sales tax proceeds annually to pay for the lease agreements, and the same amount for any future debt service if the lease financial agreement is assumed by the county and it refinances it by issuing debt. The Board of Commissioners commits that it will pay the difference in the lease amount and the $2,200,000 annually, and the difference in any debt issuance used to refinance the original loan. The BOC and BOE commit that they will share any reduction from the $2.9 million original payment estimate once the Board of Commissioners' interest expenses drop below the original estimate of $700,000 and the amount of interest paid above the $700,000 annually has been recouped by the Board of Commissioners. Number 24, in the Board of Education Board of Commissioners agreement, the Board of Education commits that it will pay for all operating expenses, including staffing, utilities, supplies, and all other costs necessary to operate the schools from their existing operating budget. And if you recall, this was the agreement when we were looking at an operating lease. We will have Davenport compare the total issuance cost for Piper Jaffray's financing of the capital lease. And I should interrupt and say Piper Jaffray is the developer's financial people. We reject the developer's footnote wanting us to pay for any issuance cost above $750,000. And as you see the comparisons on what the issuance costs are later in the presentation, you'll see that ours are substantially lower than $750,000, and yet he wanted a footnote saying that if his went above it, you would pay it. The issuance cost shall include all costs and fees for a bond counsel, financial advisor, Piper Jaffray on the lease option, discounts minus premiums, underwriting, rating agency, and any and all other fees necessary to enter into either the capital lease financing or a 16820 financing. All these issuance costs must be agreed to in the capital lease agreement. We agreed to have the county and school board attorneys and our bond counsel, Tom Lee, address what our legal remedies would be if the developer became insolvent, was unable to make the required debt service payments on his financial agreement, declared bankruptcy, or in some other way failed to meet his financial obligations in a timely manner. Again, our bond counsel has some comments for you in that regard as far as him being a bankruptcy remote entity. All 4 documents must be prepared, approved by the Board of Education attorney, the county attorney, and our bond counsel. No further conferences will be held with the local government commission until all of the documents making up this deal are fully prepared and approved by the developer, Board of Education, and Board of Commissioners, all subject to the final approval by the North Carolina Local Government Commission. The developer will give his written approval first. Then the Board of Education has to publish its notice of intent to enter into this capital lease or decline to enter into the capital lease. At the meeting referenced, the Board of Education has to adopt a resolution making the determinations set out in NCGS 115C 532C and approving the capital lease. If they do that, they should also approve the interlocal agreement with the Board of Commissioners, the land lease with the developer. In addition, the Board of Education has to comply with the provisions of NCGS 143-64.31B. It contains a detailed listing of criteria that must be met. After that, the Board of Commissioners should schedule a meeting to vote on the land lease, the capital lease, the financing agreement between the developer, Piper Jaffray, and the county, and the interlocal agreement with the Board of Education. The final step would then be to schedule a meeting with the local government commission to get their approval of the capital lease and the other supporting documents making up this deal. Later on at the last meeting, it was agreed that the county manager will make his recommendation to the Board of Commissioners as soon as possible so that the parties will know if the Board of Commissioners is in agreement to use the capital lease option. In order for the Board of Education to make the determination under the statute that it is in their best interest to enter into this capital lease, we should compare it to the design bid build option for both the high performance, which is just a fancy name for having a solar and geothermal heating and cooling system, and the non-high performance option. The spreadsheet that we've been working on contains that analysis. And Marcia, if you would do that, please. The county already has committed to cover the cost of installing the wastewater collection system. The Board of Education would pay for the monthly sewer charges and fees if an on-site system is not installed at either of the sites. Bear in mind that this proposal does not include any construction administration fees that the architect would charge. And I want you to pay particular attention to this. The March 3rd contract specifically states in Article 11.1, quote, compensation for construction phase services shall be based on the construction delivery method selected by the owner. Those have not been negotiated. So if you go with the capital lease, then the Board of Education and the developer will be back to you with a negotiated still additional fees to the 19.1% that he originally had. It also does not include the cost of the independent construction inspector. So that is all of the details of, it will take 4 separate agreements to put together this capital lease and do it in a manner that meets the state statutes, that nails down what your contribution financially will be and what the Board of Education's contribution will be. It would nail down the financial agreement and under what conditions you can assume it after 5 years, and how you can refinance it if you want after 10 years. So as you can see, this is a very, very complicated and complex transaction. Now, you can do that, or you can look at another option. And the next option is the design bid build option. This option is authorized by NCGS 143-128. I've given you the statute as attachment 4 for you to read. In it, an architect is selected per state statute. He designs the facilities, prepares the final plan, specifications, and contracted documents for a negotiated fee. Once the plan, specifications, and contract documents have been approved by the owner, which in this case is the Board of Education, they must be submitted to the Department of Public Instruction and the Department of Insurance for approval. And I might add that that's the stage we're at, because those permits have been submitted, but I don't believe they've all been received as yet.
That was the information I was given yesterday.
Contractors can be pre-qualified prior to the bidding. After that, the project is advertised for sealed bids. The bids are received, opened publicly, and the contracts are awarded by the owner, which in this case is either the Board of Education or BOC, to the lowest responsible bidder. The owner can either contract with the architect for construction administration services or contract with another party. Those services are primarily inspection of the construction, review and recommendation on any proposed change orders, approval of shop drawings, and approval of periodic pay requests based on the percentage of work completed and materials on hand. The Board of Education would need to negotiate a surplus energy sales agreement with the two electricity companies involved. We would also need to have an interlocal agreement with the Board of Education that includes bullet points number 23 and 24 above, as well as a commitment to provide the $5 million under the capital lease option. The construction would take place, the buildings would be completed, and the certificates of occupancy issued. Then the Board of Education would occupy the building, and we would make the annual debt service payments according to the interlocal agreement between the Board of Education and the Board of Commissioners. As you can see, that's a much more streamlined agreement and a much more streamlined deal for you to get into. The next possibility is a design-build option. However, as I said in the memo, it would have been a viable option had the Board of Commissioners and the Board of Education agreed to its use on the front end. Since the project is already designed, it really would not be an option at this point. The only thing I want to stress about that is simply to say this. In the future, it would be ideal if the Board of Education would inform the Board of Commissioners that they're getting ready to look seriously at designing a school, and then y'all work cooperatively on the design of it, because under these different methods, you've got to approve it anyway, and then it's got to go to the LGC. And if you do it on the front end, you don't preclude using the design-build method. If they go to an full architectural plans, as they did here, this precludes using the design-bid method. So I simply wanted to make that comment looking to the future of any other schools. The last is a public-private partnership construction contract. Again, this option is also not available, as it would have had to be selected before the architect was selected. So two of the options were precluded because you were not included on the front end. The next section is my recommendation. I'm recommending that you approve the design bid build method and the issuance of the required funds using a North Carolina General Statute 160A-20 financing, and that's certificates of participation or a similar debt issuance. Note that under this method, there is no concern about the financial strength of a landlord over the next 5 to 20 years, as there would be using the capital lease option. There is no concern about a future contract with the two electricity companies for surplus energy sales. That would have been determined on the front end. There would also be no concern about the North Carolina Department of Revenue possibly ruling that the estimated $1,200,000 of sales tax cannot legally be reimbursed to the Board of Commissioners or Board of Education using the capital lease method. We know and are certain that it is legal using the design, bid, build method. The developer claims his entity will be a bankrupt remote entity. However, our bond counsel has some reservations about that. With the design, bid, build method, we don't have to worry about his financial condition. That's no longer an issue. If you look at the enclosed spreadsheet and notes, you will see that the capital lease option ends up costing far more than either of the design, bid, build options. And now if we'll go back to the spreadsheet. If you look at the spreadsheet, the design fees component is $1,975,000 higher using the capital lease option. That's the $4,993,049 versus the
What page are we on?
95.
95 and 97.
Thank you. Everybody following that now? If you look at his design fees, which is line item 2, his is $3.8 million is what he agreed to come down to. We have $2,750,000. And let me explain something about the $2,750,000. That's the $2 million contract he has. I have already put in an additional $750,000 that would cover employing someone else to cover change orders, pay requests, and a great deal of the inspection. So this is actually covering some costs that he hasn't even covered yet. So in addition to being lower, it already has $750,000 additional money set aside for these additional professional services that you may need. So I want to stress that point as well. And I want to also stress that the way I arrived at those numbers is I talked to a highly reputable architect in the Charlotte metro area that I have used on other county projects and reviewed all of that with him. And he feels very comfortable with that number. So he's $1,975,000 higher than the design, bid, build. And if you went with the non-high performance option, it would be even more. But that's with the construction costs phased in. If you go to line 28 on the spreadsheet, and for those of you looking, that's at the bottom of that spreadsheet. If you look at the total cost of design and construction, because the first two was the breakdown of the design and the second part was the construction cost, you'll see that again, he's $1,750,000 more than the design, bid, build option, and he is $7,865,000 more than the design, bid, build method for the non-high performance school. And just to reiterate what the difference between high performance and non-high performance is, the high performance school has the solar arrays to generate the electricity to run the schools, and it also has a geothermal component to the heating and HVAC system. And the non-high performance schools is just a standard HVAC system. The total amount financed, which, Marcia, if you'd go to the second page, please. The total amount financed is line 7 on the second page. Does everybody see that? That shows the differing amounts needed for the three options. The capital lease is even higher because its cost of issuance for the debt is $178,400 higher than the design, bid, build option on the HP schools, and even more on the non-high performance schools. So I think you can see everything follows a pattern. Virtually everything he does for you is higher. We asked Davenport and Company, LLC, to provide us two possible scenarios for debt repayment. level principal payments, and level debt service payments. The Local Government Commission, as I said before, prefers the level principal payments method. As the name suggests, you pay off the same amount of principal each year, so the interest payments start out higher, but they decrease each year. Consequently, the total debt service payment, principal and interest, is higher in early years, but declines over the 20 years. As you can see, the advantage of this option is that you pay less interest than if you use the level debt service payment options. The difference here is if you look at the $52,082 on line 18, okay, that's with level debt service. Or you look at line 12, which is if you use level principal payments. That's a difference of $2,433,364. And basically what that is that's how much less interest you will pay over the 20-year period if you use the level principal payments. And so that is the precise reason why the Local Government Commission prefers that, because they want you to pay your debt down as quickly as possible, and they want you to spend less money on it. So that's why anytime you ask the Local Government Commission what do they recommend, they're going to tell you level principal payments. When you select that repayment method, the capital lease method requires total lease payments of $52,868,395, and that's line 12, to only $49,648,808 for the identical, and I want to stress that, for the identical schools using the design bid build method. Again, that's line 12. That's a savings of $3,219,587, and you're getting the identical product. We then had Davenport factor in the cost of electricity that the non-HP schools would have to pay, while also including the savings under the capital lease method and the design bid build method of selling the excess electricity. Using the level principal payment method, because that's clearly the cheapest repayment method, the difference in cost of the three options are as follows. The design bid build method for non-high performance would cost $903,818 more than the high performance. So what that says is you should go with the high performance schools, put in the solar array, and go forward with that.
Mr.
Yes,
Would
sir.
you repeat what you said, the entire statement you just,
Yeah.
about,
That if you use the level principal payment method and you factor in the savings from generating the electricity, that offsets the cost, the initial cost of putting in the high performance system. In addition to when you, if you are able to get payments on selling your excess electricity, then the high performance schools are the better option by $903,818.
if the solar thermal system works, and if Duke Energy does not get glutted, and they
Correct,
change the game on us,
correct.
if all things are equal in our fairest day, we will save that $9 million.
Yeah,
I mean-
900,000.
900, I'm sorry.
That's right, Commissioner. Now, one thing I would stress is, remember that the savings is $30,000 a year from the sales back to Duke. So even if you lost that, that's $600,000. So this would still be the better option. Okay. And then finally, after you get all of that done, we had Davenport take these figures that are expressed in current dollars and perform net present value analysis on them. And that simply discounts the value of the dollars based upon an assumed rate of inflation. Because remember, you're going to make these payments over 20 years. You're also going to be getting $30,000 20 years from now is not going to buy what it buys today. So under this final analysis, the comparison is as follows. The best course is still the design bid build method for the high performance schools. Second best is the non-high performance schools design bid build. And still the worst option is the capital lease method for high performance schools. So as you can clearly see, the best option by far is to use the design bid build method to build 2 high performance schools. It's a better option than the design bid build method for a traditional school and has the added advantage of being more environmentally sound. The worst option by far is to use the capital lease option. Using current dollars, it will cost us $3,377,276 more than the design bid build method to construct the exact same schools. And Marcia, if you'd go ahead to the next, you can flip through them, a couple more. Yeah, here we go. Let me remind you that this pricing for all 3 options does not include any money for change orders. It also does not include the money necessary to connect to the sewer system at Spring Creek and either connect to sewer or install an on-site treatment facility at Grantham. Those are potentially big-ticket items that this $3,377,276 in savings would help offset. The design bid build method, in addition to being the most economical method, also takes the uncertainty away about whether we will get the $1.2 million reimbursement of state sales tax. It also takes away any concern about the financial strength of a landlord for the next 5 years. We know that it would be readily approved by the LGC. And you would not be approving a capital lease method which no other county in North Carolina has chosen. You can see from this consideration of the legal and financial issues why no other North Carolina county has used the capital lease method. And that list includes some of the most financially sophisticated county governments in the state of North Carolina. When you talk about Mecklenburg and Wake and Guilford, and Forsyth, those are the 3 or 4 largest counties in this state. Their financial people are extremely sophisticated, and they walked away from this. To recap, I'm recommending that you use the design bid build method to bid out the construction of 2 high-performance middle schools with a $5 million contribution from the Board of Education and issue an NCGS 16820 debt issuance. And in order to qualify for the sales tax reimbursement, I will leave this to the attorneys, but I believe that the county will need to do the actual construction contracts, then turn the schools over to the Board of Education at a later date. This recommendation is predicated on the execution of an interlocal agreement between the Board of Education and the Board of Commissioners that incorporates the verbal agreements discussed previously and listed below. Number 1, the Board of Education commits to using $2,200,000 of lottery and/or sales tax proceeds annually to pay for the debt service. The Board of Commissioners commits that it will pay the difference in the annual debt service amount and the $2,200,000. The Board of Commissioners and Board of Education commit that they will share any reduction from the $2,900,000 original payment estimate once the Board of Commissioners' interest expenses drop below the original estimate of $700,000 and the amount of interest paid above the $700,000 annually has been recouped by the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Education commits that it will pay for all operating expenses, including staffing, utilities, supplies, and all other costs necessary to operate the schools from their existing operating budget. I believe that this is the most economical method of financing these 2 schools and avoids a number of legal issues. It does not require the preparation of 4 legal documents and a very complex deal to put together. It is straightforward, and it is the norm in North Carolina. This analysis simply confirms the reasons why it is the norm in North Carolina. I want to thank Commission Chairman Wayne Aycock and Commissioner Joe Daugherty, County Attorney Borden Parker, and Finance Director Pam Holt for the numerous hours they've put into this analysis. And I want to also thank their counterparts at the Board of Education who have worked through this process with us. Mr. Chairman, that is the memo, but I'd like to go through a couple more calculations with you. If you look at the screen, the developer's original proposals under the capital lease method would have cost $7,403,051. After negotiations with the Board of Education and the Board of Commissioners, that amount was reduced to $4,993,049 if you went with the capital lease. So that's a savings of $2,410,000. If the design bid build method is selected, the savings from his original proposals would be, he had $7,403,051. We would be paying $3,018,000 for a savings of $4,385,000. So I don't want you to get confused between the $3.37 million and this. The $3.37 million is the difference between using the capital lease and using the design bid build method. The $4 million here is the difference between what he originally proposed, which was even worse than the capital lease method that we have now because we took it down a considerable way. So, one other thing to look at, this is before you have to finance those amounts for 20 years. That was just the raw numbers. If you look at the spreadsheet comparing options, financing $36,546,000 requires repayments of $49,648. That's a 35.85% in interest expenses.
Hit the wrong thing.
Okay, in interest expenses. So if you can go ahead to the next one. Oh,
That is it. This is the last one.
back up one if you will. Using that same percentage then, because that's how much the interest rate expenses would be, the two savings amounts would rise to this. The $2,410,000 times 1.3585, once you finance it, would be $3,273,987. The savings from the design bid build method over what he originally proposed would be $5,957,025 once you have to finance it. So I think you can see that by far the best method is the design bid build method for the two high-performance schools, and we move forward with that. And again, I want to stress that's predicated on the Board of Education agreeing to the things that we had discussed under the capital lease that they would do there. All we're asking them to do is to make the same commitments under the design bid build method that they were willing to do under the capital lease method. And yeah, under the operating lease, excuse me. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my report. At this point, if you have no objection, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Parker and Mr. Lee. And as y'all know, Mr. Lee is our bond counsel. We also have Mr. Bob High here from Davenport so that you have any questions on the financing. And I want to close with one comment, and I want to, I've thanked our staff, but I would like to thank both Mr. Lee and Davenport. They have been extremely helpful as we've gone through this analysis.
Good morning, I'm Tom Lee with Walmart Carlisle from up in Raleigh. Happy to be here today. Some of you know I'm a Wayne County native, so always happy to be back here in Wayne County. I don't have anything specific prepared to say. I was here to answer your questions. I would say that the design bid build method, I'll reiterate that is the way most school financings, other than schools that are financed with general obligation bonds, That's the way school financings have been done in North Carolina. I personally have probably worked with about 20 counties on doing school financings that way. It's a fairly straightforward financing. The capital lease financing being proposed, that was added to our law in 2006, as Mr. Wood pointed out, has never been used. And I have, I'm quite often in my work in the middle of a lot of things going through the General Assembly involving public finance. When this particular statute went through the General Assembly, it wasn't really something that the counties or the schools were really pushing. It really came more from, I think, the developer community, and a lot of us who did represent the governmental side of things were sort of puzzled as to why there was a big push for this. The way I've described it before to some of you is that it was a solution in search of a problem, because we had ways to do our school financings in North Carolina. So that is the way things are done. I do think, and I don't want to overstate the risk, but certainly there are areas of risk that are associated with capital leasing that are simply not associated with the traditional 168-20 design, bid, build method of doing things. There are some potential bankruptcy issues. I don't want to overstate that, but they are there. And I think what we're seeing, as I pointed out to Mr. Wood a few weeks ago, the entire world of bankruptcy is a constantly evolving world, and it can be very unpredictable. And people, I think, who own some bonds issued, general obligation bonds, issued by the city of Detroit, Michigan, are finding out that right now, that bankruptcy courts can do some things that you don't really expect them to do. But I do think there is some bankruptcy exposure that can be managed, but it will involve more risk and also more oversight, I think, by the county and the school board over ongoing operations to make sure you don't have to deal with that. I'm happy to answer any questions now or later as we at your pleasure. Board.
As George said, we have worked on this together. He has raised all the issues that I have raised. I'm not confident that the capital lease would allow you to get the sales tax. We know that under the other way, you can get the sales tax refund, and the Board of Education certainly has used that before, and I expect, and they may have done last night, adopted a resolution conveying the 3 buildings that they are going to renovate that you've already approved to you, and then you'll have a contract with them, making them your agent, so you won't be physically involved with the construction. They will be acting as your agent. And that's what they've done in the past, and that's what it's my belief that they intend to do with those renovations, based on my conversation with Jack Edwards yesterday. They have, it's my further understanding that the notice that they have to give under the statute on the capital lease, that they have given that notice, and they were going to not adjourn their meeting last night, but recess it until Thursday afternoon to have the opportunity for public comment, if there was any. It's not a public hearing, but they have to give public notice of an intention to go to this, and that is supposed to be Thursday afternoon.
Thank you. Mr. Parker, do we need, or Mr. Wood, do we need any comments from Davenport, or?
I think Bob was just here in case you had any questions.
Okay.
Is that
All
right,
right.
Bob?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
Mr. King.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the county manager's recommendation on a most cost-effective method, the design to build the Grantham
accept the county manager's recommendation on the most cost-effective method to build the design, bid-build, high-performance option for Grantham Middle School and Spring Creek Middle School. And the amendment was to instruct the county manager to forward this information to the Wayne County Board of Commissioners for their consideration as they consider and vote on their preferred method of construction.
Thank you. That's right.
That Board of
Board of Education. Thank you.
And we were adding after the required 10-day public comment period. I think it's critical that the public have some comment on this.
I'm clear on that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
You're clear,
I
okay.
apologize for interrupting.
Any other discussion? If not, all in favor, show of sign of right hand. Motion carries unanimous.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Doherty.
we've got the motion there, but I did have some questions since we've got some experts here. We've got two fine attorneys and so forth, and I just need a little bit of clarification in my mind. It is the position of the developer that we would obtain the $1.2 million in sales tax benefiting us, and we'd get a refund on that. And I heard our county attorney indicate that there may be some questions on that. Now, this is kind of critical, because if we don't get the $1.2 million, all these numbers change dramatically.
Now, based on what y'all just voted on, you're going to definitely get them,
That's right.
assuming that the Board of Education agrees with the terms.
Oh, we just recommended to them, but my question, though, is...
But if you don't agree for the capital lease, they can't do it.
Well, the way I'm looking at this, as complicated as the lease is, it's all predicated upon getting $1.2 million in energy tax credits, one, but we've also got in there the $1.2 million in sales tax. If we don't get the $1.2 million in sales tax, it's almost a moot point. One way's out the other. And I'm just wanting some clarification in my mind as to whether or not the council here is stating that we probably are or are not going to get the $1.2 million in sales tax.
Are you saying if you went with the capital lease?
If we went with a capital lease where the developer is building the schools, would we get the $1.2 million in sales tax refund?
I'm not confident that you will, because it's never been done before, and we don't know what the North Carolina Department of Revenue would rule on it.
Yeah,
Clearly,
that sounds like an attorney's answer. Can we get some clarification on that? Because I think we need to know whether or not the Department of Revenue would in fact allow us to get a reimbursement of that sales tax. Is that possible?
we can inquire whether they will do it. You can ask the IRS about questions, but sometimes it takes them
And
several
would
years
bond
to.
counsel like to make some comment on that?
Well, I would agree with Mr. Parker that the using the 16820 format that's been recommended, lots of people have done that with schools in order to get the sales tax and so forth. That's very clear. The capital lease has never been used. I've read the statute, but that's really, my area of expertise is more in assisting people in borrowing money, and I'm not really holding myself out as an expert on sales tax, but I think I agree with Mr. Parker that there's some ambiguity in the statute that I think has him concerned, and
Well, my only question is, I think the school board needs to, and we need to all know whether or not that is a viable option. If we're not going to get the sales tax refunds, that makes a big difference in this overall program. So I just think hopefully any clarification you give the school board would be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? Okay.
Now, we'll say the developer's lawyer has no question in his mind that it'll be done.
Again, no comment.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Kamari.
Mr. Parker, you're saying that the developer's lawyer has no question in his mind that the sales tax would come back under the capital lease, but you don't have the same, you don't have any way to know the same thing. But my follow-up question is, under the design bid bill, the sales tax would be in place.
Yeah,
So
as
it's a
Mr.
null-
Lee said, there's no question about that because that's been done over and over in this state.
And we've done it here in Wayne County.
Sure.
And that's what I wanted the public to hear, that one we are sure of, the other one we have no assurance of. I just wanted that, I thought that's what I heard, but I just wanted that to be said again. One we are sure of, the other one is a maybe, possibly not, or 7 years down the road of knowing, so just want to be sure.